Okay, this recording is for Wednesday, October 29th. Zevachim Memhe 45a. And we begin near the top of the page at the Mishnah, fifth line. Kashe of the Kachavim. If you have a kachim, like a sacrifice that is sent by or that belongs to an Ovid Kachavim, so a non-Jew can send can have a carbon. He can't actually do any of the avoda, but he can have it done on his behalf. Now, ein chayavin leim mishum pigul noser v'tamei. However, when it comes to the rules of pigul and nosar, meaning leftover, the isur of eating the leftover meat after the time, or eating it while you're tame. So, as we will see, these things are not permitted, but you don't have the punishments that are don't have the liability that is delineated by the Torah for a regular carbon. Vashochtam b'chutz pater, and if you do the shechita outside of the mikdash, again, you're not liable. Usually, you would be liable for doing that, but you're not in the case of the sacrifice of an oved kochavim. Divrei Reb Shimon. That's what Reb Shimon says. Reb Yossi mechayev. Reb Yossi says, no, all these things you are liable for the penalty. Tana Rabbanan Rabbi Saad Kashev the kochavim lo nanim v'lo malin. You cannot. So it belongs to the temple before it's, or even after, but while it belongs to the mikdash, you cannot use it. And if you do, if it were regular carbon, you use something that belongs to the mikdash, then that's a violation of me'ilah. But in the case of this one, Avi Kochavim, you're not allowed to use it. We'll see later that probably means D'Rabbanan, but it doesn't count as me'ilah. That's what our Mishnah said. There's no liability for these three forbidden acts with the carbon. Ordinarily with the carbon, if you try to swap your Kodesh animal, assuming it doesn't have any problem with it, for another one, then guess what? The second one is also Kodesh, but it does not replace the first one. The first one is also still Kodesh. In the case of a sacrifice of an Oved Kochavim, the second one does not get Kedusha. The Tmura doesn't take effect at all. Ein Mevim Nesachim, and they can't bring a nesach, a libation, an Oved Kochavim, avol karban onto nesachim. That means you can't bring a libation by itself, but every carbon comes with nesachim. Those nesachim are permitted or required, really. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yossi says, in all these cases, I would be more stringent and treat the carbon just like that of a Jewish carbon, shenemar bahen lashem, because even when the Torah says that anyone can bring a carbon, it says to Hashem. So it's Kodesh. So it should be treated the same as a sacrifice to Hashem brought by a Jew. B'madvarim amurim. When do we say all these things, that these things are excluded from? No, when do we say about me'ilah that it doesn't count as me'ilah? That's something that's a sacrifice that the Oved Kochavim sent to be offered on the Mizbeach. But what if you made a donation to the upkeep fund of the Mikdash, and then you appropriated that inappropriately, then there is me'ilah for that. So we're only talking about karbanos and that kind of kodesh. Now, let's look at the sources. Lo nanin v'lo malin. Where do you get the idea that you can't use these things, but you're not liable for me'ilah? Lo nanin midrabanan. The fact that you can't use it, that's only a rabbinic ordinance. V'lo malin. Why doesn't the Torah hold you liable for me'ilah? The gamar me'ilah chet mitruma. Because of Gzeir Shava, the word chet is used by both truma and me'ilah. Truma ksiv b'nei Yisrael v'lo Oved Kochavim. Truma specifically produce that belongs to Jews, and produce grown by a non-Jew is not subject to truma, and so we apply that to me'ilah as well. You don't have the liability for these three things about a carbon. My tama, why? Da'asi pigul oven minosar, vasinosar chilchu mituma. A double hekesh. So we saw the same thing yesterday. That pigul is compared to nosar, nosar is compared to tuma. So all three have the same rule. Ubatuma ksiv b'nei Yisrael. And about tuma it says who can't eat carbon when they're tame? A Jew. So the same thing applies. Nosar is only for Jews, and Pigul is only for Jews. Love de kochavim. Beinosin tamura. You can't make like if you try to swap it, the swap does not take effect at all. My tama, why not? The iskash truma lamaser behema because it is linked to maser behema. That you have to take a tenth of your flock every year for the as a carbon. Maser behema iskash maser dagan, and that is in turn linked to maser of grain. Uba maser dagan ksiv b'nei Yisrael, and as we saw with truma, it's only Jews that are required to separate maser for grain, and so we apply that to Maser Behema, and then in turn apply it again to Tamura. Ksiv b'nei Yisrael v'lo avdei kochavim. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Okay, this I noted this yesterday. That seems a little far-fetched, right? That A is linked to B and B is linked to C, so we apply the rules of A to the rules of C. Well, that's all very well and good, but we have a view that when it comes to Kanshim, we don't use a double hekesh. Okay, so what's the deal here? We don't do that. So Gemara says Maser Dagan Chulinhu. Now we're starting with the grain, Maser of grain. That's not hektish. That is that it's property rights, right? It's like a civil thing that you have to give it to. You have to give Maser, but it's not kodesh. It's not a carbon. So it's okay to go the two-step hekesh. But the Gemara says Hanichal Mandi Amar Baser Melamed. That's okay if you're saying that the beginning of the chain, it's okay if it's not kachim, so then you can apply it twice. You can do the two-step hekesh and end up on kachim. Elamandi amar baser lamed azlinan, but lamed azlinan. But if you say that no, you don't do the two-stage hekesh if it's the thing that you're trying to derive the new rule about is hekdesh. So that's the case here. So how can you do the hekesh? Michael Maymar. Mara says Elamaser behema chova she'en kavur azmanhu. Now, the reason that that the Ovid Kochavim's animals are not liable to Maser is because Chovash and Kavul Azmanhu. It's not, there isn't a fixed time for it, for the carbon to be brought. The Maser, the behema that is brought for Maser as the Maser carbon, there's no particular time that you have to bring it. So V'chovash Ein Lazman Kavua Yisrael Maitu. And that doesn't apply to non-Jews. That's apparently the Gemara has this rule that a non-fixed time carbon is only something that only applies to Jews and not non-Jews. Okay, and we don't. The Ovdei Kochavim don't bring Nesachim, and we said that that's only the Nesachim that you bring by themselves, a libation offering. However, any carbon comes with Nesachim on its as a side dish, as it were, that does apply, but the Nesachim as a main course does not apply for Ovdei Kochavim, Tana Rabbanon, Ezrach, because it says HaEzrach, a citizen, I guess is the translation of Ezrach. It says about Nesachim. Ezrach maybe Nesachim, Ve'en Kochavim maybe Nesachim. It only applies to Jews, right? From the word Ezrach. Yachalote also to non-Nesachim. Maybe it also applies to the side dish Nesachim that you bring with any carbon. Maybe an Oved Kochavim doesn't bring those either. No, Talmud Lomar, Kacha. Call Ezrach Yaseh Kacha Ezela. Every Ezrach should do like this. So the extra word, I guess, Kacha, implies that that regardless of who the owner is, it still requires a nesach on the side. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi said in the Mishnah No, I think that we should be machmir on all these because all these sacrifices are to God. They're all kodesh and they should be treated the same. But Medvarim Amurim, what does when Rabbi Shimon said um, like that of the kochavim offerings are not subject to mi'ilah, b'kachim mizbeach, etc. He said that's kachim mizbeach, but not kachim bedek. My tama, why? Kasavar, because Rav Shimon holds ki gamra mi'ilah chet chet mitruma. When we do the hekesh, when we do the equivalence of mi'ilah and truma. Dumya the truma the kadisha kedusha saguf. What are we talking about? We're only talking about the kind of me'ilon that applies to kedusha saguf. So just as you're deriving from truma itself is kodesh, right? Truma itself has intrinsic holiness. So again, that applies. We're going to apply that only to the kind of me'ilah that has its own intrinsic kedusha, i.e., a carbon, but money that or something that you're donating for its economic value that doesn't have kedusha haguf, and so that we're not talking about. So we don't derive the lack of me'ilah in such a carbon from a Jewish carbon. I'm not carbon, but we don't derive the lack of me'ilah in Kadshe Bedek Habayis coming from a non-Jew. We don't derive it from the Jewish Kadshe Bedek Habayis because it doesn't have intrinsic kedusha. Our kedushas bedek habayis, kedushas damim lo. Kedushas bedek habayis, the donation to the temple fund, that is fungible. That is monetary. The kedusha's monetary value and not intrinsic value. Tana Rabbanan, Rabbi's taught, dam shanitmo izrako, blood of a carbon that became tame, and you did the zrika anyway. Again on the mizbeach, b'shogeg kurza. If you did it by accident, then the carbon works, right? Whatever the carbon was coming to accomplish is accomplished. Some expiation of some sin. But mezid lo hurtza. But if you did it on purpose, then the carbon doesn't count. B'medvarim amurim biyachid. That's talking. Now that has to do with a individual's carbon. But if it's a communal carbon, doesn't matter if you had intention to do it to sprinkle the tummy blood or not. If you did it, you weren't supposed to do it, but if you did it, then the carbon accomplished its purpose. Ubi of the kochavim. What about the carbon of an ovi kochavim? It doesn't. Whether it's shogig or mezid, it doesn't work. Interesting. Amru Rabban Kamid Rav Papa. The rabbis were discussing this before Rav Papa. Come on, whose view is this? Lo Rabbi Yossi. Can't be Rabbi Yossi's view. The Rabbi Yossi Ha'amar b'chul nirol achmer. Rabbi Yossi said in our Mishnah, all of these things I say we should be machmer, and including talking about a Ovid Kochavim sacrifice. He said we do apply me'ilah. But basically the idea is that it should be treated exactly like a Jewish carbon. So this brisa was not said by Rabbi Yossi because we distinguish between non-Jewish and Jewish karbanos. Gemara says, Rav Papa said to them, Afilu tem Rabbi Yossi. Oh, you can reconcile it. You can say that this brisa even accords with Rabbi Yossi. Shani Hasam, in the case of the blood that is tameh, Diamar Kra Lahem. The Torah uses the word lahem, talking about the tzitz. Now the tzitz is maratza on Tuma in the Mikdash. The tzitz is the gold band that the Kohen Gadol wore around his forehead. So l'ratzon lahem lifnei Hashem. It says about the tzitz that it's in order to achieve a ratzon, a favor before God, and lahem v'lo de kochavim. Why is the tzitz worn? To provide favor, to invoke God's favor for them. Who's them? Them is the Jewish people. So of the kochavim would not be included. So generally speaking, we'd say that we treat Jewish and non-Jewish korbanos alike. But when it comes to did it work? Is it maratza? So that is a matter for the tzitz, and the tzitz specifically accepts non-Jewish korbanos. Amar Rav Huna Bereder Rav Nasan Rav Papas Rav Huna objected. El miata asher hem makdishim hachaname hem v'lo de kochavim. So when the Torah says about people who are tame, they shouldn't go into the mikdash. It says hem, right? Hem makdishim, which they meaning the Jewish people. So we should also say that only applies to Jews and not non-Jews. So how can you bring but Bar Yossi said that a tame, Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah said that a tame offering of a kochavim should be treated just like a Jewish one. So why would that doesn't make sense. That doesn't accord with this. If you're going to say that haim or lahem indicate the rule is only for Jewish korbanos. Elam Ravashi, Amakra, L'Ratzon Lahem, the Kochavim Lebnei Hartzon. It's not from the word lahem; it's L'Ratzon, right? That these sacrifices are supposed to, what's the word I'm looking for here? Supposed to bring favor to the people who are bringing the sacrifice, and the idea is that God finds favor with the Jewish people, or the Jewish people find favor with God, and in a way that Ovdei Kochavim do not, and that's why they're excluded from this rule. Next Mishnah, Dvarim she'en chayavim leim mishum pigul, things that you don't have the pigul penalty, chayavim leim mishum noser mishum tameh. But you can still be liable for actually eating it after the time, or eating it while tameh. Chutz min adam, except for blood. Meaning, one second. Yeah, if you eat the blood, you're not supposed to eat the blood, but if you do eat the blood and it's no sir, then you're not chayav for that. Rabbi Shimon chayav b'davar shedarkan la'achol. Rabbi Shimon says you're chayav only if it's something that usually is consumed, that's usually eaten. So only edible things that are sacrificed, like the mincha or the but maybe not the emurim. Is that what it's excluding? What is Rashi saying here? Rashi on the Mishnah. Yeah, so it applies to anything that is eaten. Oh, here the Mishnah says but things that are go on the mizbeach, like the wood for the fuel and the incense, which one doesn't usually eat. If you do, then it doesn't matter. Like you don't get if you do eat them while they're tameh, it's not. You don't get the punishment because it's not an edible thing. Tana Rabban. So here's a brisa. I might have thought that so we saw already that you're only chayav on pigul if it's something that has a matir, right? That it's step 2 in a 2-step process. And you can only do step 2 after step 1. So the step 2 is subject to pigul. Maybe the same applies to tuma. Vidinhu, and I would say it's a kal v'chomer. Uma pigul shehu b'kviyah. Pigul applies to a specific shubikvia, that there's the liability for pigul if you do it accidentally is bring a specific chatos. There's a chatos for that. And when you chayav for pigul, when you just have this one thought of eating, like only part of the time that you're doing the avoda did you have this thought. It's still a pigul thing. V'lo hu termi klalo, and there's no exceptions. So it's so strict that it has all these conditions, but still it's only pigul if there's a matir. So tuma shiba olavi yored. Tuma, there's different possible karbanos which get you off the hook, or not get you off the hook, but for which you are liable. Olavi is, depending on your economic circumstance, you can bring a more expensive or less expensive carbon. Ubishtei yediyos, and you have to you have to have two yedias, two awarenesses. You have to know that you were tame, and then you have to forget it. You forgot that you were tame and you ate the kachim, and then afterwards you remembered again, and that's how you know that you were over, right? So, so it's less like you have. Pigul is so strict that one yediyah, right? One thought is enough to make you on the hook for Pigul. But Tuma, you have to B'shogeg, you have to have two thoughts, right? You have to have two knowings, if you will. You have to know at one point that you were Tame, forget you were Tame, and then remember it again. So it's seems like less severe. Um, Uhutra miklala, and there is an exception. So as we've seen before, tuma hutra b'tzibur, if most of the people are tame, then all of a sudden tuma is not a problem. You can eat the korbanos b'tuma. So it's not so strict. So so I would have thought to say that just like pigul is only you're only liable for pigul if it's on something that, for there which is a matir, but not for something for which there's no matir. So tuma for sure should have that leniency. But no, we don't say that. We don't say that kol chomer because Talmud Lomar, because we have a pasuk asher hem makdishim li. The isur of eating kachim betuma uh, applies to things which they sanctify for me. That meaning to include anything that is sanctified, including something that has no matir. So you can't. So although pigul, you get off the hook if for something there's no matir. When it comes to tuma, there's no such exemption, and anything that is done, anything having to do with kudshim, if you if you eat it betuma, that's a bad thing. Yachol, yachol miyad. Now, one sec. Now, when it comes to davar sheyesh lo materian, right? Maybe it means like only if it's immediately preceding the matir is immediately preceding the action that you do pigul on. Maybe that's the case. Talmud lomer yikrav. No, any ishi sheyikra, anybody who comes near the kachim, that person gets kares. So. One second. No, I think I said that wrong. Um, yeah, I might have thought that the carbon is under this isur right away from as soon as you designate it for kachim, it's for a carbon, right? So Talmud Lomer Yikrav, only when it's being sacrificed, that's when it's pigul applies, like only in the avoda. Amar Blazer v'chiyesh nagea shu chayav. Um, uh, is somebody who just touches the carbon while he's tame, does he get kares? No. Only if you eat it. Alamatam lomer yikrav. Why do you have the word yikrav? Behuchshar likarev hakasur v'davar. It's talking about where it's already been it's already had its matir, right? It's ready for going on the mizbeach. Okay, so how does that work? Yesh matirin, something that has a matir, right? It's like now ready to go on the mizbeach because it's the previous step was performed. Misha yikravu matirin, meaning that from when the matir has been done. Ein lo matirin. But if it's something for which there's no matir, then the Isur, for example, the Kometz, the Lavona, the Mincha, or the Minchas Kohen, right? There's no matir. When do they become suitable for the Mizbeach? B'sheikdash b'kli, once it goes into the Klei Sharis, right? So you designate your flour, you bring it to the Mikdash. Once you put it in the Kli, so that's when you're liable for eating it betuma. And now what about Nosar? Ashkechan Tuma. So I understand all the Tuma. Nosar Minalan. What about Nosar? Where do you get those rules? The same rules. Asi Chilu Mituma. Gzer Shava, right? Lichalel is the word is used in both places, so we apply one to the other. V'leila of Avon Mipigul. Wait, so you've got rules for Pigul that are different from rules from Tuma. And you're trying to figure out which one is Nosar like. So you're going to say Nosar is like Tuma because there's a similar word. But notice there's also like Pigul because there's a different similar word, Avon, right? So how do you know which one to apply? Do you apply Pigul to Nosar or do you apply Tuma to Nosar? Tuma rules to Nosar. Mistabra mituma have leila. It's more logical to apply Tuma rules to Nosar. Shekain Gezel Siman because there's three things in which is similar, and the mnemonic is Gezel, Gimel Zayin Lamed. Um, Gimel is goof. Um, they're both like physical things that happen to it, right? Tame comes in touch with Tuma Nosar. It's like it violated a time period, whereas Pikul is just a machshava, it's just a thought. Zrika Zayin is Zrika Sadam. Um, the Pigul, Zrika Saddam applies to, Pigul applies to Zrika Saddam, right? If you have a Pigul thought while doing the blood, that becomes Pigul, but there's no such involvement with no Saratame. Um, and Chilul, they're both, so, Gazel. The Lamed indicates Chilul, even though it starts with a Chas, but it has two Lameds in it. Um, so they're both called they're both use the word chilul. So that's so really it's just two reasons that we choose to use that hekesh, that similar word, to apply the rules of tuma to nosar rather than the rules of pigul to nosar. Versus Adarab, people have aleph. Logically, I could say the opposite, that you should apply the pigul rules to nosar. Shekain, hutar, seats, tahar, bisman, karev. Like all these there are five reasons that pigul is more like nosar than tuma is like nosar, and those are hutar. There's no exception. Seats. The seats doesn't work for either of them, right? The seats is works for Tuma, right? It expiates Tuma, but doesn't expiate Pigul and Nosar. And Tahar, the if if Pigul or Nosar takes place, it doesn't make the rest of it doesn't make the carbon Tame. Only Tuma does that. Bisman, both of them have something to do with time. Pigul is a thought about time, and Nosar is actually violating the time bound. Actually, the time restriction, but Tahar has nothing to do with time. And Karev, they're both um, they both have to do with the carbon itself, and Tuma has to do with the person himself. Um, so Vani and efficient. So we have five ways in which Pigul is more like Nosar than Tuma is like Nosar. So go with that. So Gemara says, okay, so there's a different reason that we're going to use Tuma as the model instead of Pigul for Nosar. Elamida Tani Levi is from what Levi taught. Tani Levi, Minayin Sha'af Bipsul Zman Akosu Medaber. How do I know that that um, uh, the psulms on custom adaber, the pasuk that takes the Easter of eating the carbon while you're tame and extends that to all um, to not just the things that have a matir, but things that have no matir. Um, how do you know that applies to nosar? So in other words, he's asking the same question. Where do you get this from that tuma is the model for nosar? The pasuk says they won't violate my holy name, which they are making kodesh to me. B'shnei chilulin hakasum davar. Echad psul nosar ve'echad psul tuma. We're talking about two kinds of actual chilul, desecrations of the carbon, like you're actually doing something wrong with them. And these are tuman nosar. Again, pigul is only a thought. You're not actually doing anything wrong, yeah, to make it pigul. So since these both have to do, since the Torah says that it has to do with two types of chilul, that's why we're going to apply the rules of one to the other, and pigul is a separate category. Okay, and we'll stop here for Wednesday and pick it up on Thursday with Memvav with 46.